This happened last year around this season, while I was broke and struggling to make ends meet. I had just moved out and didn't want to resort to going back to my parents. Anyways, I was so desperate I ended up looking on Craigslist for caregiver and housekeeping type gigs, just to make quick cash, while I looked for a full-time position elsewhere. After responding to several, I got a bite back from a man who had advertised as a disabled man who needed help with his morning and evening routines since he had a bad back. As a past caregiver, I thought nothing of his request to help with bathing and dressing, since I knew it could be difficult for some. After chatting on the phone and coming to the conclusion that he was nice and normal, I proceeded to head over to his townhouse late one night to help him with his nighttime routine. He lived a bit out of the way from me, but I was desperate and didn't mind. He even said I could spend the night since he'd need me in the morning anyway. Once I got there, he was a decent looking man in his late 30s or early 40s with a cane. He paid me the $200 up front for the expected nighttime and morning routine the next day. He explained he was ex-military and had back surgery recently. But things started to get weird once he offered me some wine and commented on how cute he thought I was. I should have seen that as a big red flag, but again, I was super poor and I didn't want to cheat him out, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt. He then led me to his bedroom where he got undressed for his evening shower. I was horrified since I saw that he already had a giant erection and wanted me to lather him up. He asked me if I wanted to take my clothes off and I declined, and surprisingly, he responded respectfully. However, he did touch my butt when I bent over to pick something up for him. I should have ran out right then and there, but I was waiting for the right moment. After giving him the most unsexy shower in the most platonic way I could, he got out and said he was heading to bed, but didn't want to wear any clothes. The guest room where I was supposed to stay was right next to his, and although I was tired and I was pretty on edge, my gut instinct was telling me to get the hell out of there. The issue was that we were in a third-story townhouse and we were on the top floor. He also had installed baby gates on each floor so his cat wouldn't run. Also, he had turned off all the lights on the lower floors, so it was pitch black. In order for me to get out, I'd have to pass his room. I quietly arranged my stuff in my purse while I heard his TV blaring, and to my horror, I saw him walk swiftly to his bathroom without his cane. At this point, I realized he was not as disabled as he had told me, since he had previously put on an act as if he couldn't walk without it at all. He also still had his heart on and was holding a giant bottle of lotion with him. So as quickly and quietly as I could, I fled and ran like hell out of the room while he was in the bathroom, and I jumped like an Olympic sprinter over the cat gates down the dark stairs. As I threw the front door open to run to my car, I heard his house alarm go off. I then got into my car as fast as lightning, with my heart beating like crazy. I immediately got phone calls from his number, and every car that trailed me had me terrified until I got far enough away from him. Finally, after a 2-hour drive, I was back to my place and grateful I was out of there. Who knows what could have happened if I had stayed overnight, but I didn't want to find out. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in, so far so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like that, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I'd seen her room yet, and I said no, so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned every single one of his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was very creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me that she was obsessed with this guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much, and we hardly spent any time together, really. she would come home from work and practically just run to her room and stay in there the whole night. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls at night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out to talk to me for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected that she had been drinking a lot most of the time. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it didn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and I tried to sleep. One night, I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy shift into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story and she was so riled up, like she was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she really said that freaked me out. As she was in such a fit of rage, she yelled, "I'll slit his effing throat." You see, that was a big game changer, because suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. Extremely unpredictable. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarming and disturbing. She told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettling feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. So I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor, and Beth was trying to push the door open. I turned on my light, and I was shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was obviously impaired, and she had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed, and eventually I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying how she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open, and also that she didn't remember telling me about her ex. I obviously had enough at this point. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me again. I was at the movies and my phone was off. But when I left, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I had 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" or "I effing hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond to either of them, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. Amanda is my brother's girlfriend. At the time of this story, she was looking for her first apartment and moving out from her parents' house. Her and my brother didn't want to move in together since they had only dated for a few months. She opted instead to search for a roommate online. Browsing Craigslist, she found an ad titled something like "Roommate Wanted, Females Only." This sort of thing was common since the area she was looking in was mostly young professionals. The listing was for a room in a house for about $225 a month, which was quite cheap compared to most places listed. The occupant listed herself as a 23-year-old college student that wasn't comfortable living with any men. The other roommate would have their own room and attached bathroom. So far, Amanda was into this place by the sound of it. The listing only had a single photo from outside the property. Amanda sent an email wanting to meet the occupant and tour the house. Within 30 minutes or so, she receives an email back with all the details and time to stop by. The girl worked late hours and wanted Amanda to stop by at 8 p.m. When she finally arrives, there is a handwritten note on the front door saying, "Door broken, use back door." Walking around the house, she said it looked nice but slightly unkept. Tall grass, weeds, dusty windows, and etc. But still no alarms for Amanda though. When she knocks on the back door and an older man opens the door, at first she thinks that she has the wrong house. But the man reassures her and says that the occupant, I forget the name, was out and that he was the landlord. He said that the occupant asked for him to meet Amanda since she was working late. He seemed pleasant enough and offered to show her around. At this point, she said alarms were starting to go off but weren't at red alert yet. First, the guy was clearly in his 40s. He was unshaven and looked like he had lived in his car. Also, only the kitchen light was on. As they walked around the house, Amanda noticed one huge red flag. There was no furniture. The landlord was polite about answering questions but seemed irritable to keeping lights on for too long and rushing her around and only letting her look at the rooms for a few moments. There was a single room that the landlord wouldn't open, telling her that it was the occupant's room and that he didn't want to invade her privacy. As they walk down the hallway into the living room, she notices the front door has a plank nailed across it. Amanda's creepometer is starting to ding, so she decides to wrap up the walkthrough and leave, but trying to be polite. As she's giving the guy her "thanks for showing" bit, he perks up and states that he forgot to show her the basement. He said it was recently furnished and would be a great rec room, etc., he exclaimed, and that she should take a look down there. At the time, Amanda and the supposed landlord are standing in the small hallway between the front living room and the back kitchen. In this little hallway was the basement door. When he opened the door, it opens outward to create something of a barrier between Amanda and the back door. The basement is pitch black, and he smiled at her, motioning her down the stairs, and says, "Ladies first." What happens next is nothing more than a stroke of luck. Amanda gets a text just as some random person parks in front of the house. Thinking on her feet, she pretends it's a phone call and answers her phone. "Hey, yeah, are you here? I'll come out from around back and let you in. It's great, you have to see it." With a motion of confidence, she excuses herself around the landlord and walks out of the back door. She says the guy just looked at her like he was confused. Once outside, she sprinted to her car and sped like hell out of there. When she got home, she told her mother and my brother everything. Cops were called and they took her statement and went to investigate. The Craigslist post had been removed as well. It turned out that the house had been foreclosed over 6 months earlier and that the property had been abandoned. When the police investigated, they found that the closed room the landlord didn't want her to look in was where the man had been staying. There was a pile of old dirty blankets, rotten food, and empty gallon jugs everywhere. More creepy was he had plastered ripped up pages from porno magazines on all the walls in the room. The really scary part of this though was the basement. The man had tied a thin piece of fishing twine about shin level across the stairs about halfway down. The basement was empty except another pile of old blankets and a broom handle wrapped in leather belts and a small box with a few rolls of assorted tape.